Hey everyone, Luke from SafetyWise. In this video today, I want to talk about the costs associated with obviously training, ICAM Investigation training, and then some of the costs on the business and the ROI on that expense of giving training, whether it be ICAM lead training, ICAM mastery, whatever it may be within the workplace. So let's start off with some of the really obvious things and talk about direct costs. So I'm talking direct costs. If you have an incident in the workplace, there's direct costs that are directly related, that makes sense, to that incident. So for example, there could be things like medical treatment for those that are injured, could be workers' compensation, could be other things like equipment repair, property damage, the emergency response. Certainly in some jurisdictions, you may be charged and invoiced for the response. You've got regulatory reporting and implications there. You've got remediation, environmental remediation, I should say. Then you could have investigation expenses and so on. Now, in many cases, you can insure against some of these costs. So, you know, there is a bit of an offset sitting there, but these are some of the direct costs that we have within an incident. All right. Now let's look at the indirect costs, the things that we don't necessarily see that are going to be simmering in the background. We're going to have production downtime. And if you think about some of the workplaces we work in, like take mine sites, for example, where, you know, a daily run might be generating, you know, $500,000 and so forth in production revenue and so on, more in many cases. We've got overtime, so the overtime might be coming about because we're trying to get the site back up and running, or we could be bringing people in on overtime to replace people and things like that. And that's replacement labor as well. You know, depending on circumstances, there may be recruitment costs. Sorry, I had a mental blank for a second there. Training new personnel, management time, so time for managers to train people, onboard people, that sort of stuff. It could be legal advice, could be delays to delivery of for customers, you know, your product and services. Could be contract penalties attached to it because you're missing timelines and so on, and could be supply chain disruption. So these are your indirect costs when we have an incident. All right, the next thing I want to look at is the hidden costs that come about when we have an incident in the workplace. So these are big, and you can see these all the time happening in the workplace. It could be as simple as things like reduced employee morale. When someone's injured or worst case scenario is killed in the workplace, I guarantee there's going to be an impact on the morale of the rest of the workforce. They are directly involved in this incident. They know the person, they work with the person every day. There's the potential loss of trust. Will they trust you again as an employer? Are you going to do anything about this incident, or is it just going to get swept under the mat like it often does? That can then lead to things like lower productivity. People are not motivated, they're not interested in being there, they're feeling demoralized and so forth. They're not going to want to work at full production. It could end up resulting in higher staff turnover, and then you go back into those direct and indirect costs there when you're trying to recruit someone and replace them and so forth. There's knowledge loss. You know, if you've got a senior worker who's been with the business 25 years and suddenly they're off work for 6 months, you know, where's all that knowledge that's sitting up here in the head? Is it on paper? Not on paper? Is it, you know, literally sitting inside their brain? We've got lower engagement in the workforce and so forth. Now, the thing is with a lot of these can accumulate over a period of time. You know, it can build up. You may not even notice that it's actually happening, but I guarantee that it is in many circumstances. So these are the hidden costs when we have an incident. The next cost, strategic costs. So these are the things that can alter the organisation's performance and how it's perceived around the workplace and to the public and so forth. So the first one we want to look at is things like prosecution. So prosecution from the regulators such as WorkSafe and so forth. Enforceable undertaking. So this is where WorkSafe give you an enforceable undertaking, and a very public enforceable undertaking in most circumstances, where they will talk very openly about the organisation and name and shame, for want of a better choice of words, about things that you're going to do. So as an enforceable undertaking, you may have to produce training, have to produce advertisements in papers, you might have to produce training documents and other things like that. Increased insurance premiums. Have no doubt that if you have a serious incident in the workplace or repeated serious incidents in the workplace, things like work cover premiums and other things are going to start to increase. There could be loss of contract. There is certainly plenty of evidence out there of major contracts that are switching and changing hands because of incidents that have occurred in the workplace. I would hate nothing worse, for example, than you've invested multi-millions of dollars in recruiting people, equipment, and so forth. And because of your injury performance or incident performance, you've now lost that contract. What do you do with all those people? What do you do with all that equipment that you've invested in and so forth? The other big one for many organisations is the concern that comes from shareholders. Shareholders at the end of the day are there to make money. And if they're not making money, they're going to start raising questions. They're going to start raising questions about these incidents that keep happening, the increased costs, the direct costs, the indirect costs, and things like that. Again, flows on from there, reduced investor confidence. They're not going to trust you. They're not going to be happy with your performance. They're going to be very wary of investing further with you. Could even be things like a license to operate is withdrawn by the regulator. So you might lose an environmental license, for example, or other things like that. And that's really, really important to consider, I should say, when you're in highly regulated environments such as aviation, for example. An aviation industry that relies so heavily on licenses and regulations and needs customer confidence, that's a big thing for them. So these are some of the strategic costs that may be impacted when you have an incident. So let's have a look at an example one. And these are hypothetical numbers I'm going to use here. I'm going to base this on a mining operation. So I mentioned earlier, you might have a mine operation that the production's around $500,000, $500,000 per day. Now that's probably very conservative for some of your major mining companies and so forth, but let's work on $500,000 a day. Coming from that, you've also got all your wages and all that sort of stuff, contractors, other things like that. So, you could easily be pushing $1.2 million a day in lost revenue and production, so forth, when you have a major incident. And if, let's say, for example, your plant and equipment is down for 3 days, suddenly that's $3.6 million or more that you've lost and probably are unlikely to recoup, I should say, not recur, my apologies. Suddenly you start to look at the training investment and go, well, is it really a bad investment? If we're looking at an ICAM investigation rollout across a large business, it might be $100,000, $140,000 a year, and that might be fundamentals of investigation of 5 whys. It might be some ICAM lead training. It might be the ICAM mastery program. It'd be some investigation governance for managers and in governance for senior execs and office holders and so forth. Suddenly that 140 grand actually does look like a good investment. If we can work with you and actually help you reduce the likelihood of the incident or the impact if the incident was to occur, suddenly that $140,000 versus a $3.6 million loss is a no-brainer. The other thing to consider is that investigation training supports multiple levels of the organisation. So it's going to benefit your frontline workers. So there's going to be improved confidence in reporting. There's increased trust. There's going to be better learning across the organisation and safer work systems. So you're going to get more engagement or better engagement for your frontline workers. For supervisors and managers, the benefits can include, improved incident management. So when something does happen, we know what to do, how to do it, when to do it, that sort of stuff. It's stronger leadership, and we're going to negate some of those negatives that we spoke about previously because they can see leadership that's actually standing up, stepping up, and taking action and learning from the incidents. We're going to put in place better corrective actions. And I'm not going to sit there and say that just because we have a corrective action, we're going to prevent an incident. Incidents can still happen, but hopefully we can reduce the impact if the incident does happen again. There's also greater operational understanding of, the business and what the weaknesses may be within the business when we start looking at systems and processes. And then we've got the managers, senior managers, execs, things like that. The benefits of them include, improved decision making. We're making decisions based on things that have happened and what we need to do to prevent them. We're not just winging it, we're not guessing it. We know this has happened, this is what we need to do to prevent it, and this is what we need to do to reduce the impact if it was to happen. We can put in place stronger governance if we have the proper investigations in place and investigation training in place. We can better allocate resources. We suddenly find work as done versus work as imagined is very different in the workplace. great to sit in your office and write these policies and procedures, but in the real workplace, they don't work in many cases. We've also got increased or improved risk visibility. We've got visibility of what the risks are and the impact that's likely to have in the business and what we need to do to prevent them. So these are just some of the benefits if we actually do investigation training. Again, I go back to that example of the mine site, that $140,000 investment, and I said these are just made up figures that I'm giving you, suddenly pale in comparison to a $3.6 million loss or more, and then all the other things that come out of it. So these are just some of the things we need to consider when we're looking at the return on investment, or the ROI, for investigation training and ICAM training. Let me know your thoughts below. What are your experiences?